The Call of the Wild, 잭 런던, 야성의부름 15번째 이야기, Chapter 6, For the Love of a Man. It was at Circle City at the end of the year that is what peace apprehensions were realized. Black Button, a malicious man, had been picking a quarrel at the bar, and Thornton stepped friendly in between. Buck, as always, was lying in a corner with a head on paws, watching his master's every action. Burton struck out without warning, straight from the shoulder. Thornton was sent spinning and saved himself from falling only by clutching the rail of the bar. Then people in the bar saw Buck's body rose up in the air as he left the floor for Burton's throat. The man saved his life by instinctively throwing out his arm, but was hauled backward to the floor with Buck on top of him. Buck loosed his teeth from the flesh of the arm and drove in again for the throat. This time the man succeeded only in partly blocking, and his throat was torn open. Then the crowd was upon Buck, and he was driven off. A miners' meeting, called on a spot, decided that the dog had sufficient provocation, and Buck was discharged. But his reputation was made, and from that day his name spread through every camp in Alaska. Later on, in the fall of the year, he saved John Thornton's life in quite another fashion. When the three partners were lining a long and narrow boat down a bad stretch of rapids on a 40-mile creek. And that winter, at Dawson, Buck performed another exploit. This exploit was particularly gratifying to the three men, because they needed the outfit which it furnished, and they were able to travel into the Virgin East, where miners had not yet appeared. One night, in the Eldorado Salon, men were boastful of their favorite dogs. Buck, because of his record, was the target for this man, and Thornton was very hard to defend him. At the end of a half an hour, one man stated that his dog could start a sled with 500 pounds and walk off with it. A second bragged 600 for his dog, and a third 700. Pooh, pooh, Buck can start 1,000 pounds, said John Thornton. And break it out and walk off with it for 100 yards, demanded Matthewson, a Bonanza king. Well, Matthewson said slowly and deliberately so that all could hear, I've got $1,000 that says he can't. And he slammed a sack of gold dust of the size of a Bolognese sausage down upon the bar. Nobody spoke. Thornton's bluff, if bluff it was, had been called. Further, he had no $1,000. Hans and Peter did not have that amount either. I've got a sled standing outside now with 50-pound sacks of flour on it, Matthewson went on with brutal directness. So don't worry about it, Thornton did not reply. He did not know what to say. He glanced from face to face in an absent way. He looked like a man who has lost the power of thought. The face of Jim O'Brien, a Mastodon king, an old-time comrade, caught his eyes. Can you lend me 1,000? He asked, almost in a whisper. Sure, answered O'Brien. But I have little faith that the beast can do the trick, John. The Eldorado emptied its occupants into the street to see the test. The tables were deserted, and the dealers and gamekeepers came forth to see the outcome of the wager and to lay odds. Several hundred men, furred and mittened, banked around the sled within each distance. Matthewson's sled, loaded with 1,000 pounds of flour, had been standing for a couple of hours, and in the intense cold, it was 60 below zero. The runners had frozen fast to the hard-packed snow. Thornton's doubt was thrown in his face, but his fighting spirit was aroused. The team of 10 ducks was unhitched, and Buck, with his own harness, was put into the sled. He felt that in some way he must do a great thing for John Thornton. Murmurs of admiration at his splendid appearance went up. Buck was in perfect condition, without an ounce of superfluous flesh, and his weight of 150 pounds was full of grit and virility. Thornton stepped to Buck's side. "You must stand off from him," Matthewson protested. "Free play and plenty of room." The crowd fell silent. Thornton knelt down by Buck's side and whispered in his ear. "As you love me, Buck, as you love me," was what he whispered. Buck whined with suppressed eagerness. Thornton stepped well back. "Now, Buck," he said. Buck tightened the traces, then selected them for a matter of several inches. It was the way he had learned. "Gee!" Thornton's voice rang out. Buck swung to the right. The load quivered, and from under the runners arose a crisp crackling. "Ho!" Thornton commanded. Buck duplicated the movement, this time to the left. The crackling turned into a snapping, the sled pivoting and the runners slipping and grating several inches to the side. The sled was broken out. Men were holding their breath, intensely unconscious of the fact. "Now, mush!" Thornton's command cracked out like a pistol shot. Buck threw himself forward, tightening the traces with a jarring lunge. His great chest was low to the ground, his head forward and down. The sled swayed and trembled, half started forward. One of his feet slipped, and one man groaned aloud. Then the sled lurched ahead, though it never really came to a dead stop again, half an inch, 2 inches. The jerks perceptibly diminished. As the sled gained momentum, he caught them up, and now it was moving steadily along. Men gasped and began to breathe again, unaware that, for a moment, they had ceased to breathe. Thornton was running behind, encouraging Buck with short, cheery words. The distance had been measured off. As he neared the pile of firewood, the end of the 100 yards, a cheer began to grow and grow. And he burst into a roar as he passed the firewood and halted at command. Every man was tearing himself loose, even Matthewson. Hats and mittens were flying in the air. But Thornton fell on his knees beside Buck. Head was against head, and he was shaking him back and forth. Buck seized Thornton's hand in his teeth. Thornton shook him back and forth. As though animated by a common impulse, the onlookers drew back to a respectful distance. And they were not again indiscreet enough to interrupt.